If you missed it, a couple days ago, Notre Dame head coach Marcus Freeman had some very interesting comments about former Notre Dame head coach Brian Kelly. He was on some Notre Dame, I think, ND
former
recruiting.
Player. He was a former player. Chris Zorich, I believe, was his podcast. It was a clip pulled from that podcast that was put on a Notre Dame recruiting Twitter account. He was on with a former player.
Okay. So I'm going to give the direct quote, what Marcus Freeman said about Brian Kelly, and I'm going to give you the rebuttal. Let's argue about it. Everybody hit the like and share because it's about to go down. Marcus Freeman said telling a story about how he's talking to Brian Kelly. He says, Coach, you wouldn't have even talked to this kid a couple of years ago. He is from the inner city, or he comes from the inner city.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just tell you something. I know that you think that this is not a dig at Brian Kelly, but he said, Coach, you wouldn't have even talked to this kid a couple years ago. He doesn't say Notre Dame wouldn't have talked to these kids a couple years ago. He doesn't say Notre Dame wouldn't allow Brian Kelly to recruit these kids a couple years ago. Basically, what he's saying is I'm recruiting better than Brian Kelly. Whether you believe that or not, it's what he's saying. Here's the issue, the main issue I have with this. It's statistically and highly inaccurate, the statement that Brian Kelly was not going into the inner city and recruiting kids. Let me tell you of a couple of recruiting classes of where some recruits came from before Marcus Freeman and his little pretty boy hair came when he came to Notre Dame. Let me tell you where some of the recruits came from. You ready? 3 guys came from St. Louis, Missouri. 4 guys came from Atlanta, Georgia. 1 guy came from New Orleans and is currently on his roster named Logan Diggs. 1 came from Chicago, Illinois. Another from Jackson, Mississippi. 2 came from Compton, California. Straight out of Compton. My name's Ice Cube. You remember that song? Compton, yes. Bitch. Then you got Fort Wayne, Indiana. Don't you dare try to make an excuse of what's going on at Notre Dame of it being even remotely Brian Kelly's fault. Now, it was posted on my message board and other message boards that Notre Dame legitimately, their first 4 stories on 3 Notre Dame, 247 Notre Dame is Brian Kelly hires John Jancic. Brian Kelly hires Bob Diaco. What was the other one? Marcus Freeman takes shot at Brian Kelly. The top 3 stories at Notre Dame revolved around Brian Kelly. I just got to tell you something, Joe. From a guy that covers LSU, a fan of LSU, it's time for y'all to shut up and move on. Here's the bottom line. Whether you like it or not, every single program has their faults. Every single program has something that they got to overcome. Most teams in the South, it's being stupid, okay? That's something that they have to overcome. Well, the truth is they're winning natties. Try to get on board before you talk. Here's the ultimate thing before I give you the floor on Marcus Freeman. Before you open your mouth about talking about another coach, Brian Kelly or anybody, you got to beat Marshall. You have to beat Stanford. Quite honestly, Brian Kelly had more inner city kids in Baton Rouge and recruited them, and I know for a damn right fact was in the most dangerous neighborhood in Louisiana. By the way, per capita is the murder capital in the United States per capita in New Orleans, and was greeted with open arms to recruit a kid. So you're going to have to explain to me why he says, Brian Kelly, coach, you wouldn't have even talked to this kid. He's in the inner city. Go ahead.
Look, I think this is perfect offseason fodder. This is the perfect thing that it's being reported on, and it's turning into a story on these various websites because there's nothing to talk about. This is what we do. We read
in season, I would be calling for Marcus Freeman's head. Don't you dare tell me that this is all season.
I'm not directing this at you. I'm just saying in general. We tend to do this, that when there are statements made by people in the offseason, we really read into the wording and we We like to debate over it.
Okay,
I see
very
this
quickly. Tell me how I'm supposed to receive. I talked to Brian Kelly and I said, Coach, you wouldn't have even talked to this kid. He's from a couple years ago. He's from the inner city.
Because being a Notre Dame fan,
this up.
Being a Notre Dame fan and knowing the history of Notre Dame recruiting and the way that this school, from an admission standpoint, from a sports recruiting standpoint, they have deliberately been one of the most restrictive schools in the country just overall. One of the best examples that I have.
Notre Dame was holding Brian Kelly back?
Yes, absolutely. I'll sit here and admit that. And I know right now that they're holding Marcus Freeman back. I absolutely do believe that with the whole Andy Ludwig situation. I'm not happy with the way that Notre Dame has conducted themselves recently, but I think the most prime example is that in Lou Holtz's book, I read it recently. It's a fantastic book. They talked about how Tony Rice, don't make fun of Lou Holtz. He is a saint. Tony Rice, who is one of the best players in Notre Dame history. He talked about in the book how he had great grades. He was a great academic student, very smart kid, but was not up to the Notre Dame standard. And he offered him a scholarship, but admissions came to Lou Holtz and said, you can't let this kid in. This kid can't join the program. He fought to no end to get him onto the team. He gray shirted. He had to get up to the academic standards, and he got him onto the football team. That is what the standard used to be. And it has been that way for a long time. It is gradually eased up. And the whole point of this comment is not saying, Brian Kelly, you would not have recruited guys in the inner city. It is saying that the University of Notre Dame, which is notoriously stingy and overly preppy, would not have admitted certain guys into their school and would not have allowed certain
individuals,
not individuals, but allow for looser restrictions on academics and background to come into the university. Part of what he talks about in the rest of this quote, why I believe that this is the most accurate part, is that I think that him talking about how the whole ACT score thing is he'd rather have somebody with a lower score, a lesser student, than somebody with a high score that is pompous and that thinks that they can just waltz their way into Notre Dame and carry themselves through it. His whole point is that he wants to go and get kids that want to show up and work and not kids that want everything handed to them. That's the whole point.
Why
he's not
bring
talking about
Brian Kelly's name up?
Because he's just talking about a conversation that he had with him.
Because he knows. Hold on one second. Awesome, buddy. Okay, you can go ahead. Say hey to Mr. Joe. All right.
Hi, Ben.
All right, go play. Close Daddy's door. Then you do not have to bring up Brian Kelly's name.
He's just trying to illustrate that when they had these conversations and they were having these conversations in the past, that it was a point of contention, maybe. Maybe it was something that was brought up.
Let me tell you can I just tell you how I feel about what he's trying to say from the outside looking in?
Yeah.
He got his ass kicked by Marshall. He got his ass kicked by Tennessee, and he's trying to build up the fan base and saying, guys, it's better. We're doing better things. You got to give me time because we're recruiting better than Brian Kelly did. The only reason you bring up that story is to try to save your hide. Now, I mentioned earlier, now I'm going to throw LSU under the bus. You ready? Mm-hmm. Okay, because we're not above reproach. I say we, but LSU is not above reproach, okay? You know who used to do the same type of stuff? Orgeron. Orgeron was notorious for throwing somebody under the bus. It happened every single week. Not just Ed, we see coaches doing that every week. Scott Frost did it. Scott Frost was the king among kings of throwing other coaches in previous administrations underneath the bus. Here's a news flash, okay? If that's the problem, you don't have to take the job. If you're Marcus Freeman, you already knew this. This is something that you're talking about that's already underlined. That's something that's already happened. Brian Kelly legitimately came out in the middle of the season, the year that he left to come to LSU, and he called out, Tom Rinaldi was the guy that did the interview. Go back and listen to it. He said, they will not take the shackles off of what we need to do in recruiting. That is nobody's fault other than Notre Dame restricting Brian Kelly. And it's nobody's fault that Marcus Freeman has these issues with the administration other than Marcus Freeman. Joe, I will tell you this right now. Sources. Here's some news for your ass. Marcus Freeman was offered by Brian Kelly and LSU to be the highest paid defensive coordinator, not just defensive coordinator, the highest coordinator in the country.
Yes.
He would have come damn near really close to, with the way that our state works and the incentive that he gets in the taxes on the back end in reference to housing, in reference to all this type of stuff, would have damn near came really close to making somewhere capable of the $5 million that he's making right now at Notre Dame. Don't tell me that you didn't know.
I'm not saying that he didn't know. I'm sure that he knew what he was stepping into. He wanted to be a head coach. He wanted to lead this program and a group of guys, a recruiting class that he brought to Notre Dame, and one that he thought he was bringing to in this current class, but he lost a bunch of the guys, a bunch of the key big players like Keon Keeley and Peyton Bowen. I think he knew what he was stepping into.
Thank you for also confirming a little bit of a point. I think that Notre Dame and Notre Dame fans have to be a little more realistic when it comes to who they actually are.
I'm try to be as realistic as possible. I think I'm more realistic than most Notre Dame fans.
I'm not saying you. I'm talking about in general.
Yeah. Yes.
Like, you got guys out there that are puffing up this. Who's the guy that they hired again? Why is his name slipping? The
QB coach or Gerard?
No, the new OC.
The Cincinnati. Oh no, Gerard. Jared. Yeah, or Parker.
Jared
Parker, whatever
okay?
Stupid name.
Regardless of that, okay. Now that I couldn't remember his name, I'm kind of a little bit of losing my thought process. But regardless of what's going on, Notre Dame. Oh no, here we go. Notre Dame has to understand, just because. And Joe, I say this. It's like, please, Joe. When I die, I want you to do me a favor. On my tombstone, I want you to tell my. Well, I want you to tell my wife to put this on my tombstone. You ready?
Okay.
It doesn't mean two Rudy Poos who you are or that you're blue blood when that ball kicks off. Notre Dame has hit a ceiling. And I don't think that they can get back to that ceiling with Marcus Freeman. You had one of the better coaches in college football. Mm-hmm. You settled in hiring Marcus Freeman when, the truth be told, you knew, I knew, Santa Claus knew, Jesus knew, in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, they knew that Luke Fickell wanted to take that job. It is BS that every single fucking month we got to come out here and have a debate of Notre Dame people trashing Brian Kelly and talking shit about LSU. The four main stories that Notre Dame had revolved around Brian Kelly within the last 48
The guy
hours.
was there for a decade or however long he was there. Of course we're going to talk about Brian Kelly. Of course,
we didn't talk about. We don't talk. LSU does not talk about Nick Saban the way that you guys talk about Kelly.
How long was Nick Saban at LSU?
I think, what guys, help me in the chat, 6 or 7 years. He won the first national championship at LSU in 2003 when they were not even remotely relevant since 1958.
But he's also, look, he's hiring up guys who are a part of his former staff. Of course, we're going to talk about Brian Kelly. Of course, when Marcus Freeman's telling a recruiting story, he's going to bring up Brian Kelly. He's trying to talk about how he's trying to change things. One of the other things, too, that I know, and we lost Blake, one of the other things, too, that I know about Marcus Freeman and his approach, and doing a show with a guy who is covering Notre Dame recruiting, and Ryan Roberts, who I do my draft show with, I talk to him every day about how the approach is trying to go to different regions and areas to recruit. And it's just as simple as also not recruiting Texas. And now they're actively trying to recruit Texas more. Marcus Freeman's trying to do things differently. And also on top of that, as much as we want to sit here and say LSU finished with a better recruiting class than Notre Dame did.
They did.
But well, yes, that is true. But Marcus Freeman at the same time still finished with the best recruiting class that Notre Dame has had in a long time.
That's also not true.
Well, how is it not true? They had the best,
because
better class than anything that Brian Kelly had.
These kids from the inner
city thing, they had a better recruiting class than anything Brian Kelly had.
You don't have Kyle Hamilton on your roster right now.
They lost two 5-stars.
Stop. You do not have a Kyle Hamilton on your roster right now. He was there before Marcus Freeman got there. And you want to tell me that Marcus Freeman's a better recruiter. Well, then guess what? If you're a better recruiter, you can go get a Kyle Hamilton.
Kyle Hamilton was
by the way,
under recruited.
Smith and Quentin Nelson, because you don't have those. And then all of a sudden you get rid
Charles
of
Jagasaw is a highly rated recruit. What are you talking about? They have one of the best offensive line recruiting classes that they've had in a long time.
Pro Football Focus put you at the 35 overall offensive line.
Yeah, this past year.
Okay. You know how far it fell?
Because wait.
Hold on. Do you know how far you fell?
He's not the offensive line coach.
He's the entire coach for the entire program.
But he's not the offensive line coach. The talent is on that roster.
The head coach is responsible for every single unit on that field.
Yes, absolutely. But if there's a drop-off, I put more blame on the offensive line coach.
Just walked out the door, and you better be careful if his happy ass isn't in Baton Rouge in 2 weeks.
Who cares if he goes to Baton Rouge? They just had a great recruiting class. They just had a great recruiting class.
Defending a program that has not been relevant since 1988.
They finished 9th after they lost 2 kids who were 5 stars during the recruiting cycle.
It doesn't matter who's committed. Jamar Chase, at one point in time under Les Miles, was committed to Kansas.
But no, that's not what I'm getting at. They didn't have a massive drop-off. It's not like they were hanging their hat on
5 stars. What do you mean you didn't have a massive drop-off?
They didn't fall out of the top 10. They had a well-rounded class.
7 months ago, you were the number 1 overall class in the country. You fell all the way down to 11th.
They still finished with one of the best recruiting classes that they've ever had. It's one of the most well-rounded recruiting classes that they've ever had.
We
talk about the restrictions that they have.
Brian Kelly's had multiple top 10 classes at Notre Dame. And you're going to say this is the best class? You better pray to sweet mother of Notre Dame that you got a good recruiting class. But I promise you do not have a Kyle Hamilton on that roster right now. Tell me I'm wrong.
Kyle Hamilton wasn't a highly recruited kid. Neither was guys like Kyron Williams. He was a 4-star. Peyton Bowen was a higher rated recruit than Kyle Hamilton was.
Does not matter to you anymore.
Kyle Hamilton was a 3-star until the end of the cycle.
Joe, he was rated in the top 100. What are you talking about?
That didn't happen until the end of the recruiting cycle. He, for the most part of the recruiting cycle, was under-recruited. He was under-recruited.
So Brian Kelly went into the inner city of Atlanta and got him?
He went to a private school in Atlanta.
Joe, let me just tell you something how it works in the South, because you're not from here and you've never been here, but maybe like a handful of times. A lot of kids go to prep schools. Okay. You know why?
Okay.
Most kids that are extremely talented in the South go to prep schools for specific reasons. Okay?
Yes. Same thing. It's the same exact thing in New Jersey. Okay. But there are other guys. And that what Notre Dame has to do to produce success.
What's the big one in Jersey?
St. Peter's and Seton Hall Prep and Don Bosco
Don Bosco. That's it. Yeah. Don Bosco. You mean to tell me that every kid from Jersey City and Atlantic City?
No. That you're right. That's besides the point. They have and are capable, and if they want to succeed, they don't have to go get the 5
Doug
stars.
Nose says that Notre Dame finished 7th with Brian Kelly's last class.
A lot of credit but Marcus Freeman was there. So
here's the problem with that though, Joe.
A lot of people give credit for Marcus Freeman for that recruiting class. Here's the problem with that.
Who hired him?
Oh my God, Brian Kelly hired him, but are we going to just automatically discredit everything that Marcus Freeman's done?
If the head coach is fired from wins and losses and recruiting and everything, Joe, I don't think you understand right now. The head coach is over everything.
I understand how that works. I understand how college football works.
He's over hiring Marcus Freeman.
But I'm supposed to ignore the fact that Marcus Freeman gets credit behind the scenes for putting together a fantastic recruiting class.
The year before Marcus Freeman was there, you had the 9th overall class.
He had fine recruiting classes.
My point is, don't say it's better than anything Brian Kelly did when he's been there since the early 2000s. It
depends off of what site we go off of, because the rankings are different per site. I believe On3 had them at 9.
What he's put into the NFL. You legitimately, let me tell you something. Y'all, Notre Dame has an issue at wide receiver. It's like they're in a Harry Potter book with the invisibility cloak. They never show up. Now clip that if you want to. That's how most Notre Dame skill positions work. Yeah. And then one of your running backs comes from a per capita, one of the most dangerous places on the country in the country, and you'd say he didn't go into the inner city?
But forget the inner city part for a quick second here for what we're debating on. I would argue that they had a lot of freakish talent. Miles Boykin, Chase Claypool, Will Fuller, just to name a few. Kevin Austin. Who recruited them? And they didn't do shit at Notre Dame because they were misused. They were talented. They weren't productive at Notre Dame as good as they could have been.
Misused at wide receiver.
Will Fuller's the only one who's not. Miles Boykin, Kevin Austin, and also
Boykin stunk.
They were all great athletes, though. They weren't developed.
Everybody's a good athlete at that position and that high of a level of program.
They weren't developed under Brian Kelly. They weren't developed under Brian Kelly. Logan Diggs and Austin.
So let me get this straight, okay? You told me earlier that Brian Kelly was held back by the administration. Yes or no?
He was.
And now you're arguing that he didn't have the better athletes.
He had good athletes, but not like super high. He didn't have any five-star recruits.
You can't come in here and say that Brian Kelly was restricted in who he could go after and that Marcus Freeman is fighting for that now and say, it's Brian Kelly's fault. What you should be doing, not you, just meaning Notre Dame fans. You know that I love you. Notre Dame fans should be picketing outside the Jesus statue, calling for your AD to be fired. And for the priest to be, I don't know what the word is. Like I could ask, re-priesteted. I don't know the word. Get him out of there.
Impreached,
whatever it is.
It's not the word. Never mind. I was trying to put it to make a pun. There was a terrible pun. Look, you and I could scream about this for hours, but I think that just from the original argument, I think that it feels as though there's just in general, I'm not saying you, a willingness, as much as Notre Dame fans and pundits are trying to say that we're talking about Brian Kelly and we're trying to take a shot at Brian Kelly.
You are.
I think that LSU fans also at the same time might be reading into this as there's drama when there isn't. I don't think that there is drama. I think everyone needs to calm down. I think everyone needs to calm down. There isn't drama.
How can you come in here and blame LSU fans when he's the one that made? How else am I supposed to read that?
As I explained it earlier, it has nothing to do with him. It has nothing to do with him.
Last point I'm going to make on this. Yeah. As the great Lil Wayne once said, keep my name out your goddamn mouth.
They're going to be attached to each other for the entirety of their careers.
Bet you Brian Kelly's is longer at LSU's than what Marcus Freeman's is at Notre Dame.
Probably. And I wouldn't be shocked if in 5 years from now, Marcus Freeman isn't on Brian Kelly's coaching staff in some formation if he doesn't figure things out at Notre Dame.